Karen's obsession with control and domination had now crossed into the realm of reckless audacity. She believed she could cut my lock and seize my vehicle, imagining that her perceived HOA authority, combined with intimidation, could override legal rights and common sense. She had assumed that fear, spectacle, and her position would compel compliance. But she had failed to account for preparation, foresight, and the law, three elements that ensured her plan would collapse before it even began. The morning began with Karen and her enforcers approaching my property. They were confident, walking with the swagger of entitlement and authority. They were convinced that cutting the lock would be simple, that the vehicle could be seized, and that I would be powerless to stop them. What they didn't know was that every step they took was being meticulously recorded. Cameras captured the entire approach, strategically placed to catch every word, gesture, and move, while I observed from a secure position, ready to respond. As they reached the vehicle, Karen attempted to cut the lock with force, underestimating both my preparation and the legal protections surrounding my property. I calmly approached, displaying evidence of ownership, legal documentation, and the recorded history of her repeated overreach. The enforcers, initially brimming with confidence, began to hesitate as they realized the situation was far more complex than Karen had presented. Her bluff had been spectacularly exposed. Karen, unable to comprehend her sudden loss of control, attempted to escalate verbally. She shouted, demanded compliance, and gestured wildly, hoping to intimidate me or regain a semblance of authority. But every action she took only reinforced the evidence against her. Her entitlement, her repeated miscalculations, and her reckless disregard for law and property rights were now documented in detail, creating an irrefutable record. Neighbors who had grown accustomed to Karen's antics began to notice the spectacle. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, a figure of HOA authority and intimidation, was now exposed as reckless, incompetent, and unprepared. Her confidence was visibly cracking, replaced by frustration and panic, as it became evident that her plan had failed completely. The vehicle remained secure, the lock intact, and her authority evaporated in real time. Karen's plan had not only failed but had produced permanent documentation of her recklessness and entitlement. Her attempt to assert power through theft and intimidation had backfired spectacularly, strengthening my position, reinforcing legal boundaries, and exposing her for the manipulative and reckless figure she truly was. Each escalation she attempted was systematically dismantled, leaving her credibility in tatters and her social influence diminished. By the end of the encounter, Karen was left flustered, frustrated, and publicly humiliated. Her repeated misjudgments had collided with foresight, law, and preparation, producing yet another chapter in her growing saga of failure. She had assumed that fear, authority, and intimidation could bend reality, but the reality of preparation, strategy, and lawful action had prevailed. Karen's obsession with control had now become her undoing. Her repeated attempts to dominate and manipulate were consistently met with resistance, preparedness, and legal authority. Neighbors, authorities, and even her own team could see the pattern. Entitlement without foresight and preparation is doomed to fail, and arrogance is always vulnerable when confronted with law and strategy. Her audacity had resulted in her most humiliating defeat yet, a public spectacle of entitlement colliding spectacularly with reality. By nightfall, Karen was left to confront the consequences of her actions. Her authority, reputation, and credibility had been further eroded, leaving her isolated and exposed. The saga continued, each escalation marking a new lesson in the futility of arrogance against preparation, law, and strategy. Karen had overreached again, and the consequences were undeniable, permanent, and extraordinary in their scale.